When you head out to the narrowest part, you sort of hug the coast of Musandam, which is the Omani exclave next to the UAE, and then you get to the narrowest point of the strait, which is 21 nautical miles. It's quite hazy out on the waters because of the topographical nature of the strait and the Gulf. We could see some ships that were not moving sort of to the east inside the Persian Gulf proper. Down in the Gulf of Oman on the other side of the strait, we couldn't really see anything. But in the strait itself, what was most striking for us was that in the course of a couple of hours, we saw about 300, I would estimate, small speedboats bouncing across the water in the direction of the Gulf states from Iran. They had been leaving the port of Bandar Abbas, one of the most important Iranian straits, and that's just across the strait from Qumzar, which is the northernmost tip of the Omani exclave of Musandam.
That's crazy. So are all, if not most of those speedboats IRGC or Iranian origin? Is it unclear? And then you write this very lovely phrased thing that you were just talking about how the topography of that region actually makes it easier for Iran to do this, because as you were saying, the shallowness of the water, the intense heat, and the jagged cliffs hemming the strait, moisture, they trap the moisture and they kind of make a cloud for them to hide these fast boats under. Where are they coming from? What are they doing?
Yes, so I think the issue when it comes to the IRGC is that this trade, the vast majority of the boats that we were seeing, is essentially a grey zone trading operation that has existed for a long time. There's always been smuggling, semi-official and official trading that goes across the strait. So going through the strait, traffic is at a halt, obviously, because there's a double blockade on the Strait of Hormuz. But there is all of this, and it's essentially petrol and diesel trading that is going on across the strait, because there are massive arbitrage opportunities, which have been a problem for Iran in the past, actually maybe turning out to be a benefit. So in each of those boats, you would see diesel in drums, because it costs far less in Iran, where it's heavily subsidized, a way of trying to reduce costs for the people of Iran in order to try and prevent further discontent and kind of protests that we saw in January. You can sell that markup in the Gulf states 500 to 1,000%. So that's obviously driven this trade. So there are two aspects to this. The first is that because you've got so many boats engaged in that, it's much easier for IRGC mine-laying boats to hide in plain sight. They can just go in, from what we understand, that you don't need special equipment. You can just load a couple of mines onto a speedboat, hide them under tarpaulin, mix in with that traffic going across the strait, and then tip the mines into the sea. And it's not just that. This is also one of the ways that Iran is enforcing the blockade, because it's got scouting boats that go out among that to make sure and chart where vessels are. Obviously, there are other ways of doing that. There are more high-tech ways of doing that, but that's one of the things that's happening at the moment.
How efficacious have these boats been? You write of this mosquito fleet, borrowing a phrase that we've seen used in the Ukraine war, Ukraine using boats like these to beat off the Russians in the Black Sea. How dependent is Iran on using smaller vessels like this to lay the mines, as you've described, menace ships, keep the blockade in place on their end?
I mean, I think this is, we are seeing the naval history being rewritten at a breakneck pace, not since the introduction of the dreadnought class of ships before the First World War have we seen anything like this, and it probably is going to exceed all of that. And I've just recently been in the Black Sea with the Ukrainian Navy as well, and to see this sort of asymmetrical Navy, so the Russian Navy obviously built for conventional warfare, the US Navy the same, but both of those, the Russian Navy has been forced back. It's even been forced largely to abandon Crimea, which it obviously occupies, and similarly the US Navy has been able to wipe out Iran's conventional Navy, but the fast boats of the IRGC's Navy, that's a different proposition. And it is literally trying to swat millions of mosquitoes. Obviously, they're not millions. That's an analogy. But yes, within that, you can see just how difficult the operation is going to be. And at night, these boats are hiding out in coves, in caves, or just in ports in Iran. Some of them can be spotted and identified using modern techniques, using drones, using the Reapers, and to a certain extent using AI. But I think it's very difficult to find all of them, and that has been one of the challenges. And by some estimates, 5,000 to 6,000 mines have been laid in the Strait of Hormuz. And getting rid of those is going to be incredibly hard, even if the blockade is lifted.
That's crazy. I don't think I realized that it was that simple to drop a mine. I was assuming it was a slightly bigger operation. I didn't realize they were literally dumping them off the sides of these fast boats. We've also spoken several times with Arsenio Dominguez, who is at the UN Maritime Organization, just about the welfare of these sailors and captains who have been trapped out on these boats for quite a while. I know you spent some time with them. Can you talk to us about, as much as you can, what it felt like on the water, whether you felt like you were in danger while you were there, and how these seafarers are holding up?
I mean, I didn't have personal contact with any of the seafarers. I think it's very difficult to get onto those larger tankers or bulk carriers on the Gulf. I mean, you know, I think it has been pretty difficult, all sorts of things being done to try and keep up spirits on those boats. So what I saw was with those smaller boats, and you know, I think there's concern about in Oman about how this trade is being potentially exposed. I think it's one of the reasons why they aren't keen on journalists being out on the water. But obviously, what we felt was the incredible heat of being out there, and I think you have a sense of that suffocation, and you know, this obvious desperation for seafarers to get home, and wondering how long they're going to be stuck there. Must be a pretty horrendous experience. And now it's sort of a game of chicken. And ironically, I think what I said at the sort of earlier on was that initially this smuggling process across the strait was a problem for Iran, because Iran is subsidizing the oil, this diesel that is then being sold. So, you know, subsidized Iranian diesel is being sold not just in the Gulf, but also in Pakistan. To a degree, that now may be a benefit to Iran, because obviously they're facing these incredible storage problems. They're desperately trying to find places to store. By some estimates from some of the people that we've been speaking to, with these small boats, you can get up to 75,000 barrels of oil a day across the strait in small boats. That's a drop in the ocean, but every little helps. So in a way, this thing that had been a problem for Iran is now being turned into something that just helps to alleviate the pressure. And obviously, the longer Iran can withstand the pressure on its economy, the longer it believes that it can hold out and potentially come out on top in this crisis.
Adrian, let me ask you lastly, what you learned through this experience, how your sense of the integrity of this blockade, I guess on both sides, is being shaped at this moment. I think we focus a lot on all of the military might that the U.S. has marshaled, but coming away from this experience, what can you tell us that surprised you about the way that this is in place?
Well, I think, you know, as I say, I was skeptical about what I would learn, because obviously satellite data tells us so much more in terms of how ships are moving. First of all, I mean, it's a larger stretch of water than one might imagine. I mean, even at the narrowest stretch, it's the equivalent of the Dover to Calais crossing. So there is quite a lot of space for people to try and inch their way through if you've got your AIS systems turned off. But what I think is just most striking is it is just an incredibly complicated, complex picture. One of the things that sort of people have suggested is, well, you know, and Donald Trump has obviously threatened to do, is to blow these boats out of the water. But the chances of causing civilian damage and the civilian communities, poor rural communities living on the coast of Iran and living on the coast of Oman and even to the UAE depend on this trade for their livelihood. So you've got to take all of that into account before you consider kinetic action, you know, full force against these kind of boats. So I think the overall lesson is that the strait is a lot more crowded than I expected, and the challenges of dealing with this are much greater than I believed.